from violent riots.
Black Lives Matter seem to believe that white police officers just get up in the morning thinking, what black person am I going to shoot today?
To shocking and indiscriminate murders.
They find that hate target is us. The cop is the most visible symbol of government authority, and they're anti-government, anti-authority.
If you listen to the rhetoric and the speeches, ordinary people can get very emotional, get angry, and they assassinate police officers. I'm afraid that that will increase.
So white lives matter now, because now the bullet is going into a white body instead of a typical 18-year-old Crip or Blood or somebody on the corner.
Our nation is under siege. Our cops are in the crosshairs.
Gunfire remained a problem last night, as well as gunfire in the vicinity of officers that were attempting to restrain what disorder did occur.
Teaching people not to respect the police, to hate the police. We're going to be growing up thinking people like Mike Brown, Eric Garner, and Freddie Gray are icons of the civil rights movement.
And a protest march is no place for a child.
You give a person a microphone, they're likely to be spewing more of the false narratives, more of the hopelessness, more of the victimization that's not going to benefit those young people, and it may actually injure them. No way this would be acceptable for elementary school children.
People who are on stage screaming obscenities, screaming threats. We had the sister of Sylville Smith, the man who was shot and killed by a Milwaukee police officer, the event that sparked the riot, screaming to anybody who would hear, burn the suburbs down.
Next on Michelle Malkin Investigates. Michelle Malkin Investigates. Now, here's Michelle Malkin.
The self-appointed leaders of Black Lives Matter say all they want is for people to know more about the high-profile murders of black men and women at the hands of police officers. And liberal foundations are lining up to pledge support for their cause. But there's a not-so-hidden agenda behind this Marxist-inspired revolutionary war on our peace officers, the only line of defense between criminals and innocent bystanders. Black Lives Matter advocates have been working behind the scenes to push their message onto our children. Teachers around the country are taking it upon themselves to create racist anti-American study materials about Black Lives Matter. And this ideology is being embraced on a state and federal level with our tax dollars on the line. This form of indoctrination will not only create a new generation of anarchists, it poses a real threat to our education system as a whole. Will Black Lives Matter teach our kids to hate and fear law enforcement? Or worse, inspire them to kill?
To many Americans, Black Lives Matter is a movement without a clear purpose. Some see it as cutting-edge activism. Others see a hate group using violence to spread fear and uncertainty, demanding policy changes within our government. Followers of the movement are determined to control their message.
How you doing? Who are you guys with? What's that? Who are you guys with?
Dr. Carol Swain is a political science and law professor at Vanderbilt University in Nashville.
Part of the problem with Black Lives Matter and the message that they're sending is that they're not focused on the conditions within the black community, how black people harm each other by their choices, nor are they giving people what they need to overcome their circumstances. You know, America is still a country that has enormous opportunities, that people, you know, can start out poor, they can overcome that poverty. That is not the message of Black Lives Matter. It has nothing to do with empowerment. You go down the list of things that are dysfunctional, that's harming and killing black people, things that black people could actually do something about, that's not part of what they mention.
Conservative news radio host Dan O'Donnell rejects the movement's policies and message.
You want to know why Black Lives Matter leaders are so able to stay on message? Because they're able to shout down any opposing message with claims of racism. There's no meaningful debate about either tactics or philosophies. There's no way there can be any sort of real, honest-to-goodness conversation, which is what we're constantly told is the goal here, right? To have a national conversation about issues of race, to have a national conversation about issues of policing, about issues of poverty, about issues of crime, about issues of drug addiction, about issues of inner city decay. Well, okay, if we're going to have that conversation, you can't just sort of end it with, well, you're a racist. That's not how conversations work. That's how bullying works.
To achieve the goals that Black Lives Matter would like to achieve, you would have to totally dismantle and overthrow the U.S. system of government as we know it today. And so, like, if you have people and they're not willing to compromise, they're not willing to work within the structure that we have, then there's going to be a conflict and it will continue to be violent because there's no evidence that we're dealing with people that are actually rational, or if we're dealing with one leader that can speak for all of those groups. If you have 68 groups with demands, who's negotiating? Who's going to be at the table?
During the civil rights movement of the 1960s, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s policy of non-confrontation resistance was based on the teachings of Gandhi.
I am happy to join with you today in what will go down in history as the greatest demonstration for freedom in the history of our nation.
Kwame Leo Lillard is a member of the Nashville Civil Rights Veterans Association.
The 60s civil rights movement had the ethos of we are not going to hurt anybody. The way we dressed at the demonstration, it was specifically to show a contrast between what we knew we would face, with white boys that had on duck-tail haircuts, leather jackets, cigarettes in their ears. We knew we had to present such a stark contrast between our opponents and who we were, that we were playing the role of being almost submissive.
Angela James is a professor of Pan-African Studies at Cal State University, Los Angeles, and co-founder of the LA chapter of Black Lives Matter.
It is not the case that we were in the dark old bad times and now we're in the better times, and tomorrow will be in the even better times. History reflects a series of protests and retrenchments, resistance and oppression. And I think that we emerge from the world with this notion of the bad old days and increasing progress, and that's done something to us ideologically that needs to be undone, frankly.
But unlike Dr. King's guiding principles of passive resistance, today's movement is intent on provoking police and crying wolf. Milwaukee County Sheriff David Clark is one of the strongest black law enforcement opponents of Black Lives Matter.
This new manifesto that Black Lives Matter has recently put out that has very little to do with the plight of black people in America today. So what it tells me is that we've come so far since the 1960s that now that we're into the 21st century and over a decade in, I mean, Black Lives Matter is scraping the bottom of the barrel to come up with something that they think is a civil rights issue.
I went to a website about Black Lives Matter, and I was shocked by what I found because it was all this Marxist language and very little about the real conditions of African Americans.
If they keep up this tack, these demands that they're making now, this whole thing might start to unravel. And what I mean by that is even black people are going to look and say, hey, what are you talking about? It's not what we're talking about.